get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October 22nd local Rotary meeting. Please silence your cell phones as Karen comes up as our Rotarian today.
As soon as she silences herself.
Bow with me, please. Lord, we just give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks, Lord, for the safety and the health of our club and our families. Father, we just we lift up to you our country. We pray your blessing upon it. We ask for your guidance and your wisdom, Lord, as we go about our daily tasks. Bless our food to the nourishment of our bodies and our bodies to your service. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. Join in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First,
it is approved.
second,
It is very well concerned.
third,
Will fulfill the will and benefit of the church.
fourth,
Will be beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you, Karen.
fifth.
As you sit down, please remember the blue buckets for Alzheimer's research. If we get a match, there was only $7 last week, so maybe a couple matches. Thank you, Jeff. Any visitors? Scott?
Well, I'll do it out.
Okay, no problem. Any prayer requests? Okay, great. One quick announcement, there's an error in the bulletin, we're doing ghost stories next week. Frank, you want to give your announcement?
Yes, just real quick, everybody remembers from the service committee, we said we're going to reach out to the order folks in our community that's been hit hard by COVID. It took a while to finally get the names from the Georgia War Veterans Home and everybody else, but we finally have them. We got the cards coming in. What we're going to do is provide the cards here next week, so everybody knows. Send an email out to all active members, and I'll break the names evenly. So you go through and write your words of encouragement on the card. Okay, and then bring the card back either at the next following meeting, or you can drop it off at the College of Education, the Dean Suite there at Georgia College. Okay, whichever way is easier for you. And then myself or Dean or someone will be there to collect it from there. So you can just bring it back there, or you can bring it back here. And then I'll go back and I'll hand them out to the Georgia War Veterans Home and the other. I think that's it.
Thank you, Frank.
Have anything real quick? All right.
All right, any other announcements?
Because once again, I would like to source paper out of the table. I'm pleased to introduce you our prospective new member, Greg Blakely. Greg is actually a Rotarian from Madison County who has retired from this area and is now living our call.
Welcome, Greg. Thank you. Well, is there any other announcements? Oh,
Sorry, my health is full.
Tonight is dinner appreciation for the chamber and for the club's members. So y'all are invited. It's free, and it's going to be at GMC's Davenport Field. We'll have great food and drinks and music and fun, and we got the whole football field. So if you will come in off the Franklin Street entrance, which is the back side, that gate will be open. Jefferson's team has set everything up for us beautifully, so I'd like to all come out this evening.
and parking?
Parking is off of Franklin Street in either of those two lots, one gravel, one paved, or you can park on Franklin Street.
Okay, thank you. Karen, want to do the second?
Okay, so today's guest is Ms. Skye Gess, who is our current Solicitor General, and she is here to talk about Innocent Violence Awareness Month.
Thank you. Like Aaron said, I'm Skye Gess. I'm the current Solicitor General for Baldwin County. A little bit about myself. So I'm actually a former Assistant District Attorney. Started out working with Fred Bright in his office in 2013 and then moved to the role of Solicitor in 2018. And today I also want to introduce you to Mrs. Linnesia Latimore Harris. She's the director of my Victim Services Program and just a wonderful, amazing teammate to have. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Linnesia Latimore Harris. I work for Ms. Gess, and I've been working in victim services since 2001. I started out working with the late Ms. Maxine Blackwell, and I worked with her until her death. Skye came aboard and just took us and continued on working with us, and I'm glad to be a part of her team. My job is to make sure that victims are represented in the judicial process, and Skye is an excellent leader that allows me to do my job and trust my judgment.
So, we're here to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we're in purple because today is National Wear Purple Day in support of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That's one of the things that we want to make sure we bring to the forefront is to educate and promote awareness in our own community of what's going on with domestic violence. So a question I get asked a lot of times is, what does a solicitor do? So I am a prosecutor, and so I prosecute both traffic offenses, anything that is punishable by up to 12 months, including your domestic violence cases, so your assault, your batteries, harassing communications, terroristic threats. There's both a felony grade terroristic threats and a misdemeanor one. So that's primarily what I do. So just to give you a little background about Baldwin County. So last year in 2019, my office prosecuted a total of 2,106 cases. So that includes your traffic offenses that require court appearance, domestic violence cases, theft cases, any misdemeanor in the county. Of those 2,106 cases, 742 of them were specifically domestic violence cases. So 74% were female victims and 26% male. And one thing to keep in mind, those are cases that are reported. Those are cases where law enforcement gets called out, a warrant is taken, somebody is arrested, and they start through the criminal court process. So this year, we've only got our numbers through August, but this year so far, even with COVID-19 and kind of a slowdown in our court system, we've had 984 cases, and 403 of them have been domestic violence cases. And again, we're at 72% are female victims and 28% are male victims. So we're still seeing, we still believe that we'll probably end up about the same as where we were last year. So this is not an issue that's going away in our own community. One of the things that I have seen is that it's happening to younger and younger victims, and defendants are younger and younger. So part of what we want to do with domestic violence and getting out awareness is also talk with our youth. So while October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, February is dating violence awareness. Because we're seeing that those unhealthy relationships forming when they're in middle school and they're in high school as well. One of the challenges we have to overcome, and one of the things that we have to do is be aware of social media. That's not something I had to deal with when I was growing up. Dealing with Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, all the other different things. We're seeing numbers of people who's sending harassing communication or threatening message. Because just become much more complex. So some of the things we do that we wanna let you know about, and always our ways to expand our program is here in February, March. In February, we have our girls' paint party. Because we know domestic violence, what we see with our female is low self-esteem. That they don't know about years and their stuff. That they've been harassed, that they've been put down, that they're all horrible things, and that they lack confidence also is part of the problem getting out of a bad relationship or a domestic violence cycle. Is they don't feel as though they have the confidence to move on beyond that relationship. So we hosted this painting party for our teenagers or for young ladies to talk about how to build positive self-esteem and how to have that healthy relationship. And if, as an adult, you've been to kind of the paint and sip, paint a picture, it's kind of based on that. So they came in last year and built, actually, at the beginning of this year, because we did get to do our paint party before COVID, they painted a butterfly and we talked about transformation and that they're going through as teenagers, that they're developing who they are, who they're going to become, and while they may not see all the things currently, that in the end, you know, it's like a butterfly, they open, they bloom, and they develop some great characters. So for our boys, what we do is a boys building bash, and BASH stands for Boys Achieving Successful Heights. And it's about linking our young men with role models in the community, male role models, because that's something that we can see a lot of times is lacking, that some of our young men don't have direction. And so building positive character through that program. So that's some of the stuff that we try to do so that when they get to 17 and 18, we're not seeing our younger victims and defendants. Domestic violence is not one of these linear type of crimes or issues. We don't go from step 1 to step 10. It's a cycle. And there are all different types of domestic violence. So a lot of times people, when they think about domestic violence, they think about physical abuse. That's something we can all see. But what we find more often is that there's a lot of emotional and financial abuse that goes on behind the scenes that I can't, as a solicitor, do anything about because I can't prosecute that because it's not a crime. But what we try to do is make sure that we can provide steps and plans to make sure that those people are getting out of those bad situations. And I'm going to let Linnesia talk about some of the things that we see, warning signs, so that maybe y'all can be aware of.
When we think about domestic violence, it's a hard thing for us to imagine because to determine what a victim looks like, we wouldn't be able to do it. Because, like I mentioned, I've been working in this field for nearly 2 decades now. And over those 19 years, I've seen white people, black people, rich people, poor people, young people, old people. It doesn't discriminate. It can be anyone. And I think that all of us in this room would know somebody who has experienced domestic violence. So, Ms. Gess mentioned that domestic violence goes so much more than just the physical. Now, the physical is prosecutable. We can prosecute that. But I think that Ms. Gess can agree with me when I say that we get people coming into the office who have all types of situations, and everything is not something that can be prosecuted, but we do have a victim services department there that can help you, because we can't prosecute if a husband or a mate calls his wife or girlfriend foul names. We can't prosecute that. We can't prosecute if we have someone who makes casual threats, but there are no witnesses, those type of things. But we can give them some information on what they can do to get to a better situation. It's tricky because when it is the cycle of domestic violence, our victims many times want to remain where they are. You know, this is a home, this is a family. So it's not as easy like, oh, well, if everything is there, why can't you just leave? It's not that simple. It's not that simple. You would think it would be, but it's not that simple. So I've worked cases where I've had women who didn't know anything about the finances in the home. They had no idea because they were isolated. They couldn't control anything. At the root of domestic violence is power and control. Power and control. That's what it boils down to, and that's what we realize. Now, there are certain things that occur. Now, some warning signs that I can think of right off the top of my head. Now, when you have someone who damages property, you know, maybe they don't hit the person, but let's say they punch holes in the wall. We've had that, kick doors. That is in itself a warning sign. We've had cases where, and how many here are dog lovers? Well, we've had cases, unfortunately, where people have taken like Yorkies and threw them into the wall. We've had those type of things. The cruelty can I mean, we've worked cases where a man has hit a pregnant woman across the stomach with a belt buckle. When we talk about domestic violence and we talk about October being National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and you see us in this purple, it can seem very symbolic, like, oh, that's cute, you know, that's nice that they're doing that. But the magnitude of what it encompasses is so deep because the worst thought is that could be your daughter or your sister or your mother, or you are, you know, someone that you love. Now, sometimes we have cases that escalate much further than a punch, which a punch is hard. And we people had bites. Bites were on the increase, and that was very troubling because Solicitor General like, wait a minute, what is this biting thing? I'm talking about teeth marks, that whole set of teeth in someone's skin. These are the things that we see. It's not isolated incidents. It's beginning to be more regular. But warning signs that we are getting into an area where there's a life-threatening situation, and sometimes these things present themselves, and we have to make sure that we ring the alarm for this victim. If a person threatens to do something, like threatens to kill you, I remember working a case some years ago. It was about 5 o'clock. You know, when it's quitting time, it's quitting time. So it was about 5 o'clock. It was about time for me to go, and the young lady came in about 4 or 5, and this was several years ago. And she had the text messages where her mate had told her that, you know, he was sick of her, and that he was going to kill her, and that he was going to get some cinder. He was going to take her. He was going to bash her head in with cinder blocks. And he was going to drive her out and drop her in the river, and that by the time her body was found, they wouldn't know who she was. Well, at that point, I knew I couldn't leave because I had to do something. That case ended up being sent over to the district attorney's office, and he did end up going to prison as a result of that. But he had a plan. He had told her she worked night shift too. He told her he was going to catch her going to the car. So these are the type of things that happen. But if a person threatens violence, if, let's say, during an argument, a person brandishes a weapon, or take out, let's say if it's a gun, you know, no problem with guns. But if you take out a gun in the midst of an argument, even if you don't point it at someone, if an abuser lays that gun on the table and starts talking, that is a sign that it wouldn't take but a second to pick the gun up. I've responded to scenes where people were killed. The people that had come into the office and that we had talked with. That's one of the scariest part about victim advocacy, especially working with victim services and domestic violence. We don't know for certain which victim is going to be our next call that may be a death. We have some ideas, and that's why we work as hard as we do. And that's why it's so important to have a prosecutor, a leader in place who recognizes that domestic violence is a huge issue, and it has been, and that we must face it head on. Ms. Gess is so fair in that she listens and she tries to make recommendations that will help people in where they are. It could be drug abuse, it could be mental health, it could be communication issues, it could be anger management issues. Part of my job is to make sure that I find out what's going on so that I have Ms. Gess's ear, so that she can know. So when she gets ready to talk with this victim, I can already get a little background information. Say they've been married for X amount of years, they have these amount of children. These are the type of things that have happened in the past. Yes, there have been women in the past, or yes, there is a history of drug abuse. All of the work as a system, all of this is going on in the background because we're trying to make sure that we keep everybody, the victim as well as the offender, but especially the victim, as safe as possible. Another sign, warning sign that death could possibly be on the horizon very close is choking. Choking. When someone will choke a person, you think about how intimate that is, because you can't do that from afar. I can't choke you from here. I gotta get up on you, and you gotta feel the person. You gotta apply pressure. And when we see that, we know that we have to handle this with even more magnitude. We have to really address it because a person, we've had women who passed out from being choked, urinated themselves, that type of thing. Domestic violence is ugly, it's mean, it's degrading, and we have to handle it as such. Some programs that we have in place to try to help people. One of them is our In Our Best Interest Women's Group, and it's a group, an educational group for battered women. And any woman can go to it. It's only for women, and we're not doing it because of COVID-19. But the First Presbyterian Church here in town has allowed us to use their space even before I came on to the job. So it's been at least 20 plus years that they've allowed us to use their space free of charge. And we go there, we meet with women, and they can bring their children, and we have a place for the children to go while the women are being educated on what are the aspects of a healthy relationship as well as an unhealthy relationship, because we have to identify. I was asked when we first sat down, if over the last 19 years, if there have been changes. There have been changes. There have been some evolution. What I'm seeing is that some of the children that were 7, 8, 9, 10, when I started, when their parents were coming into the office, some of them are now victims and offenders. And now, on top of everything else, we have, everything is so easy because of technology. And we get cyberbullying, we sometimes see pictures of people that we don't care to see. But in a relationship, sometimes people share pictures with each other, and then when somebody gets mad, everybody sees those personal things. We tell our girls and our boys when we work with them, because we believe in getting to the root of the problem before, if we can catch them when they're young, maybe we can head off certain issues. We tell them, if somebody asks for a picture, let it be up here and up, they want a picture, let it be. And we hope that people adhere to that, because it's sad when you have someone, sometimes these are professional people who have careers, and these type of things are things that can humiliate them or even cost them their jobs. And their mate knows that, and they use that against them.
And we've even seen that in people who are married and their relationship begins to disintegrate, and it's been an unhealthy relationship for a really long time. And that's one of the things, since domestic violence is all about power and control, and when the abuser starts to lose that power, they start to do different things. So threatening to send out these photos that were shared between a husband and wife at one point in time, those now get sent out. Those are crimes I had to prosecute before because they disseminated them to their parents, websites. It really does happen, unfortunately, more regularly than you would think. You know, some of the other things that we've also noticed during COVID-19, and one thing to really be aware of is people are at home now. They're not as out and about. So starting to spot the warning signs or being able to help people has become challenging because they're not leaving to go to work, or they may be able to confide in a work friend, or that may be the time where they say, I need to go to law enforcement today. Because they don't have that, especially when that power is being exerted, because there's, where are you going? Who are you talking to? What phone number are you on? Or they are sitting there. We had to actually change our roadblock to do Zoom or teleconferences. And so many times, listening to kind of the background, wonder, is somebody there? Is my defendant sitting in that room when he's not supposed to, when he has a court order to stay, or she has a court order to stay away? So we've had to adapt to challenges. A lot of times, if we just get a feeling that something's not right, we make sure, hey, you need to come in and be with us. We can't do this over the phone. Because there's nothing like sitting down with a person and seeing them face to face. They might not verbally tell you what's going on, but you can see it on their body language. You know, this year's theme for us has all been about speaking out. That's one thing that people go, what can I do to help? What can I do about domestic violence right here? And we tell everybody, you have a voice, we need you to use it. We need you to speak out against domestic violence and let people know it's not okay. Far too often we hear from friends and family members, I wish I would have just said something. And it doesn't have to be all of a sudden income well, you know, hit the topic head on. No, you can just, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And just sometimes that casual conversation will open the door. We notice a lot of times that there tends to be a lot of isolation. So especially in newer relationships, when people get together, everything is fine, there's always a honeymoon period. And then start looking for, as a friend, those little things that change. Is the person always, where are you at? Where are you going? What are you doing now? Who are you with? You didn't tell me you were going there. Why didn't you even question? You can learn a lot about how someone responds to the questions they're asking. That's the power and control that's beginning to develop. You know, one thing Mrs. Harris said is, you know, a lot of times people get frustrated and say, why doesn't somebody just walk away? And the more I work with domestic violence victims, it's not cut and dry. It's really easy to say, well, if I was in that situation, I get out. It's an easy thing to say, but when you're in it, it's a hard thing, especially with families, because part of the cycle of domestic violence is isolating from family, from friends. So they don't have that network of support to reach out. And so that's the hardest thing. And can you imagine having to all of a sudden leave your home, pick up whatever you can carry, and leave, and start all over, having to find a house or an apartment. Maybe you now have to find how to get transportation because somebody's taken the car away. There's a lot of different things that goes on of why sometimes it's easier to stay than to just leave and get out of a bad situation. And I encourage people that whether it's the first time someone reaches out to you about a situation they're in, or it's the 100th time, and I tell this to my law enforcement all the time, because a lot of times they say, well, we've been out to this house, 10 times in the last 6 months. That's okay. Go, respond, make sure they're being heard, because you never know when it's going to be that time is the time that they are ready. Because it doesn't always happen on the first time, but we have to be willing to listen and receive the information that they're giving us and be a support that's not judging their decision. It's definitely a challenge, but I truly believe that if each and every one of us stands up and speaks out against domestic violence, we can really have an impact right here in our community. And there's a lot of different ways to kind of get plugged in. We're always looking for volunteers. If anyone's ever interested in volunteering for some of the stuff that we do try to make sure that we're in our school system and talking to our kids because we believe that's where it starts. Unfortunately, we know a lot of those kids are seeing it at home on a regular basis. We've had kids come up to us and go, "Can you tell me why my mom won't leave? Why my mom letting this happen?" And telling the kids that it's not their fault, that this is not what a healthy relationship, and we make sure that they have our contact information in case they ever decide to call. And we always let them know if something bad is going on, call 911. And it's really heartbreaking to see, but we believe that we can have a great impact with our kids to hopefully break that cycle so they're not going into those unhealthy relationships because that's what they're seeing. Some of the other things that we do is we work with the Circle of Love. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Circle of Love. They are the domestic violence shelter that services Baldwin County. So anyone who is a victim here in Baldwin County who needs to get to a safe place, we make sure they get in contact with the Circle of Love. They do an intake and they go out of county to that shelter where they can stay for up to 90 days. If they have children, this particular shelter allows them to bring children with them. No pets, but they've got to take what they have and go. They enroll the children in school, but it is a safe place for 90 days while they're trying to get things sorted and figured out. They also do our temporary protective orders. So like I said, a lot of times we only prosecute crimes with a physical component, or we've got harassing communication or a terroristic threat, if we can prove it. So we have people who come in who are experiencing domestic violence. It might not be enough for a criminal action, but it's enough for a temporary protective order. So what they would do is come in, we make sure that we get them set up through the Circle of Love, who has an advocate, specially trained to deal all of the TPOs for Baldwin County. They also have other advocates for our other 7 counties that are part of the Milledgeville circuit. And they would then help them fill out that and make sure it gets to a judge, and then it would be set down for a hearing. But that's to give some level of protection. But those are some of the things. We also work with the Milledgeville Domestic Violence Task Force. That's part of the district attorney in all 8 counties. Where we're making sure that we're providing resources across all 8 counties for victims of domestic violence and also education and awareness.
Ms. Gess mentioned the TPO, that's temporary protective order. A lot of times we get people that come in and be like, I need to stay away. I need to stay away. That's like almost daily. A stay away is a condition of bond. If someone is arrested, then they have the policy that the sheriff department and the prosecutor have in place is that the person who was arrested has to sign to stay away from the victim of that crime. Now, if no one is arrested, then there's no stay away. So that's why a temporary protective order is so important. And I can tell about Georgia Legal Services.
So we also work with Georgia Legal Services. So what happens is, so once a person gets a TPO, they have to go for an actual hearing before a superior court judge. And a lot of times they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know a lot about the ins and outs of the legal system. So Georgia Legal Services can provide free legal representation to a victim on a TPO so that they can have a trained attorney to represent them in that court process. So we make sure that they also get that assistance as well. If you know somebody who is in a bad situation and maybe you don't want to talk to them about it or concerned, feel free to always tell them to reach out to us. We make sure anytime we have any domestic violence concern, we document in our office and create a running case file just in case something gets worse. So we get a lot of background information because when law enforcement has to go to residents at 2, 3 in the morning, they will often call and say, hey, we need to know about this case. Do you have any history? And I'm able to provide them to whether or not there's a cause, any other things, actually if that would take it up to somebody else's situation. So we have an open door policy, tell everybody who do what we can to make sure that someone's protecting care of. We put together safety plans so that someone can make step to leave a bad relationship and making sure certain safeguards are put in place. Because when someone goes to the opposite, that's dangerous and violent time because someone realizes it's over and they're losing power, and that's where a lot of times starting to see fatalities occur. And unfortunately, this kind of shared fatality. So I just encourage you guys to don't be afraid to speak out, to make sure that you're talking to your friends, especially if you see something because now more than ever, right? We'll never those outcries, those guys and guesses, so there's nothing to get out as we do. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
The prosecution violence is committed.
So any domestic violence act, so a battery, or if it was a forcible felony, so you're looking at your aggravated assaults, those can create what's called a cruelty to children in the third degree. So it's allowing a child under 18 to witness either a battery, family violence, or a forcible felony. So those are misdemeanor offenses, and so we do prosecute those as well. It just adds an additional charge to the battery. But when we look at that, we want to make sure that the children then are protected. So a lot of times it could be no contact. Parents can't have, the abuser can't have contact with those children. It may trigger an event with defects depending on if it's biological parent, if it's boyfriend, girlfriend, then there's different steps, but it allows us to then have a child as a listed victim and include them in any type of protective order.
I was going to probably see a foreseeable increase coming out of COVID and into the holiday season. Is that quite accurate? And how my child after COVID kind of limits our ability to interface and so on. How long are you negotiating with that this year?
So yes, typically around the holidays, it tends to run go when we have a pressure cooker. You have family coming in, or you're having to go here, financial stresses because now you're buying Christmas for family. It all starts to compound problems in an unhealthy relationship. One year I remember coming back from Thanksgiving, and the first day I walked in on a Monday, and the case I was assigned was an aggravated assault where they had gotten over a fight over a pecan pie. You couldn't have the crushed pieces of pecans, you had to have the whole ones. And that started a brawl, and someone got stabbed with a fork. So it does happen. So yes, COVID has those challenges. So the problem is we're probably behind 300 to 400 cases. So our jail has felt the impact of trying to keep COVID out. So sometimes we're not able to effectively arrest people as a normal process. There may be some delay because they're coming in and they're either they have COVID or have been recently exposed. So we know that there's going to be a wave that's coming. We just haven't felt it. Really just trying to make sure people are giving our contact information, make things right. It has every contact number on the back, and they're also given our direct link so that they can contact us. So just trying to keep that communication open as best we can, and we're using teleconferencing, Zoom, try to make sure the service is best.
I know one of the big issues, always been an issue with this, the emotional part of it, of people not deciding to come on press charges, fear of going back into that environment. I know some law enforcement agencies take the approach we go out and somebody's coming to that. What's the local law enforcement approach?
So with, domestic violence, normally that's they're going to do something, someone is probably getting arrested if there's probable cause. A lot of times we've got competing marks on both people, so it's hard to determine who started the fight. But a lot of times what I look at is, it's just kind of the different facts. With a domestic violence crime, a lot of times law enforcement will call and say, well, so-and-so does not want to press charges. They just want to go away from that. They just want them to just be left alone. Well, what I tell my officers, is there probable cause to take an arrest warrant for the crime? If your answer is yes, then whether or not the victim wants to prosecute, you need to move forward with the case. And sometimes you have to tough love your victims, because we may have a running history, and this is the fourth or fifth arrest that we've had out of this particular couple. So that's a lot of times I just tell them, if there's probable cause, if we've got this specifically visible bodily injury, then even if someone doesn't want to prosecute, that's not their call. You've been called out, you're called for assistance, because a lot of times victims, what they'll do as well is they'll call and they know that that abuser is coming back, that they're at some point going to come back to their house, whether or not there's a court order in place. People violate them all the time. We arrest them for violating protective orders. And so they're trying to then sometimes cover themselves. Well, see, honey, I said I didn't want you arrested, but they did it anyways. It's out of my control. And a lot of times I tell victims, blame it on me. Tell them, if people are questioning you about it, and like, well, I can't believe you're having so-and-so arrested, I tell them, you blame it on me. That once the warrant was taken, that was not your doing. Law enforcement had probable cause, and now the prosecutor is doing their job. You don't have to say that you are wanting this prosecuted or not. You can blame it on me to try to give them some cover, because we know there's a lot of times they are going back.
Plus, we don't want to not do anything, and then later on go back and that person ends up getting killed. And there was a call where maybe if they had been in custody, that person's life could have been saved.
Skye, I can only imagine that some of the things that y'all have seen gotta be extremely disturbing. My question is, how do you sleep at night?
There are some cases that will always stay with me. There's cases that I will never forget about. And that's what I truly believe being a prosecutor is a calling, that you have to have the passion to do this job, because it can be very wearing and tearing emotionally. And I love what I do. I love being able to help people, to redirect them if that's the path, and to make sure that I'm protecting people. Some nights I sleep better than others, but there's nothing else I'd rather do than do what I'm doing right now.
And a follow-up question, you ever find yourself getting so emotionally involved and you lose the case? I mean, does that happen?
You try to separate, you separate, I have a job to do, and I do get emotionally invested in cases, because I think to be successful, you have to. That's where your passion comes from. But there's a clear line of letting that overpower the job as being an attorney, as a prosecutor, and following the law. That's always the number one thing. The emotion comes from, when you lose a case, yes, I will be upset. I have cried with my victims when I have lost a case, but that's why we have our justice system, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. So you have to separate the two, or else, yes, your judgment can be clouded.
But we're going to win most of the time.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
We're going to win most of the time.
What are some of the volunteer opportunities?
Well, with our group, in our best interest, when we are able, we're cleared by the church to start that. We do have where you can come to the group, take all 10 classes, 10 separate classes, and you can be trained as a facilitator. And therefore, you can come back and help us with teaching the class, because it's myself and another advocate. We are those chief facilitators of the class. And it helps to have volunteers, because if one of us has to be absent or has another engagement that we need to go to, then our volunteers are trained to carry on and make sure that the material is dispersed to the class and it goes without any, hiccups or anything. So, but you have to go through the classes first, and then you have to go through facilitator training as well. But we do that because we want you to be well aware of what it is that you're taking on, and we want to make sure that you are committed to what we're trying to do. So it does take time, but it's so worth it. And you'd be surprised how many
get them to build it, to assemble it, to put it together, and just making those connections, because we know a lot of times they're not getting those positive male role models at home. So we want to make sure that they can maybe build a connection with somebody in our community who would, they may want to reach out to. And then for our girls' paint party, just looking for people sometimes who want to come help, just kind of talking with the girls, inspiring them. It's important, I think, for young ladies to see successful women, and it's just a good time for them to learn about different things, not only within our community, but as things that maybe would spark an interest in a career path for them. Yes, sir.
Well, I know most of it, I guess most of what all of this learn and cycle is from, family, family, community, whatever. And I guess, well, and I guess a lot of us do the drug or alcohol related also. And guess you, really studies about the end of that, the morning and stuff, that reading schools, reading programs, or I don't know, I was trying to, how do you break that cycle, with kids in school or kids and girls, probably.
So we're at the University of the school system, for the public and private school system, to come in and talk. We've been very, very fortunate to build a really good working relationship, not only with school administration, but also teachers. So the last 2 years, in February, Oak Hill Middle School, we've done big assembly presentations to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So going in and talking about dating violence, warning signs, unhealthy relationships, setting boundaries. That's a really big one for kids, and setting those personal boundaries and core values. So we do that once a year. We've also gone over to the high school and taught with small classes, and it's more interactive. We get a lot of good feedback from the teenagers about what they're seeing, what they're experiencing. It's really a good way for us to get questions and answers. So those are some of the things we do, but there's not like a standard program that is sort of curriculum or anything. So it's all about developing those relationships and getting teachers and administration to trust us to come in and talk. Because again, we're taking up their time of their school day, so they're not getting to do the regular things that they're supposed to do. But we try to do that as much as we can. Anytime we get invited, we always accept, we make sure we're there. We got to go to JMA for the first time, this year in February. So that was a big step. We want to make sure every aspect of our community is covered.
Harris and Solicitor Gess. Instead of a speaker gift, what we do is we have a Joe's Books partner, so if you sign this book, we'll do it in public. Thank you. Any other announcements or anything else for good? All right.
You know, that's the farmers.